Hello, welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm Peter Lavelle. Of course, I have George Samueli with me, co-founder of this YouTube channel. We both just finished reading Pat Buchanan's recent article, Where will all these war games lead? And it's a very good question. And he goes through a checklist here. He talks about what's going on in Syria, the Black Sea, what Russia is doing in the Bering Sea, which off the coast of Alaska, the whole situation in Belarus, and of course China and Taiwan. There's a lot going on in the world, George, but you wouldn't know that from the American media. I mean, these are very important stress points all around the world right now. And if anybody had any doubts, this is a multipolar world now, okay? Get off of NPR. Stop reading the Washington Post. Well, stop watching CNN. There's a lot going on in the world. Let's go through some of these things that Pat Buchanan mentioned. There was a clash with Russian and American forces in Syria. The caveat, George, is that the United States there is in Syria illegally under international law, which mainstream media will never admit to. Okay, let's talk about. Go ahead.
Right. Well, that's exactly right. In this case, I mean, obviously the Russians and the Americans have given conflicting accounts, but as you say, the key determinant here is that Russia is there by invitation from the legal, legitimate government of Syria. The United States is an invading force, and it has never been invited in, and the official position of the Syrian government is that it wants the United States out. So debating the rights and wrongs of this conflict, of this clash the other day is completely irrelevant. Yeah. The United States shouldn't have been there in the first place. And particularly when, according to the Trump administration, the ostensible goal of the U.S. presence, namely the defeat of ISIS, has been accomplished, and that what it is now engaged in is stealing Syria's natural oil resources, a wholly illegal and illegitimate activity.
And not allowing the Syrian government to rebuild, rebuild after this international proxy war that was fought in its country here. Let's move on a little bit. We have the Black Sea. We have nuclear-capable B-52s flying over the Black Sea. I mean, obviously, they're testing Russia's air defenses. We had also a minor incident where Russian planes went extremely close, apparently, to the point of shaking the plane. The Russians are sending a message too. You want to probe us? We'll probe you back, okay? Again, this is completely unnecessary. And who's upping the ante? It's not Russian planes flying in the Caribbean, folks, okay?
That's exactly right. The United States is not a Black Sea power. I mean, back in the day, there was something called the Montreux Convention, which is still applicable. That dealt with naval vessels and their presence in the Black Sea. But it was limited to the countries that were Black Sea powers. The United States isn't a Black Sea power. So therefore, its presence, its military planes' presence in the Black Sea is there entirely to spy on Russia and, as you say, to probe its air defenses, and frankly, in the business of threatening and intimidating. Naturally, the Russians don't like it, and therefore they practice a certain amount of brinksmanship as a warning sign. Don't do this. We don't like it. If you keep doing this, one of these days, something unpleasant could happen.
Yeah, and essentially, what are you doing here? Right. That's the question. What are you doing in the Black Sea? Okay. Yeah. Also, let's talk about other naval exercises. Russia has had its largest military exercise in the Bering Strait off of Alaska, the largest since the end of the Soviet Union. Why? Because of the American military buildup. This is a reaction to it. And so the Russian side is saying, look, if you're going to provoke us, we have to respond. We will respond. And so, again, instead of talking about, I would love to see the demilitarizations of these areas, okay, for everybody, okay? Just take it off the table. No warships go there, okay? We don't hear that coming from Washington. As a matter of fact, If you look at all of the Arctic powers, there's only one that wants to militarize it, and it's the U.S. Okay, the other Arctic powers say, hey, let's keep this as scientific. Of course, exploit the natural resources in an environmentally friendly way, but let's keep the peace here. Like there's a precedent for it. Antarctica, completely demilitarized. Everybody gets along, and people take pride in getting along with everyone there. Okay.
No, that's exactly right. And keep in mind, I mean, the Arctic is going to become increasingly important with global warming. So much of the Arctic land will now be possible to explore and make use of because it's now accessible, where before it wasn't accessible. So it absolutely makes sense for joint collective endeavor to exploit peacefully the natural resources of the Arctic.
Yeah. Pat Buchanan goes on talking about Belarus, which it looks like the attempted regime changes failed, which, as we both expected here. Again, even Pat Buchanan really didn't point out what's really most important is that Belarus and Russia have legal arrangements of a union. Okay, so this is from Moscow's perspective. This is us. You're on our turf. Okay. And Belarus has signed that, okay? It hasn't been completely implemented. I think now that was the condition for Putin to say, look, Lukashenko, we don't know how long you're going to stay here, and it's none of our business. But the security of Belarus is paramount to Russia because it's under international obligations through internationally signed treaties.
Yes, exactly. And that's what Putin made clear last week, that we will not tolerate any kind of color revolution, putsch, even extensive chaos and disorder, cars and buildings set on fire, because it's our country. This is happening in our country, and we just will not tolerate it. And that was a very important warning to the Europeans and the Americans not to push this. That this, anything that they're thinking in terms of Maidan, no, there'll be no Maidan in Belarus.
Yeah, and there will be no collapse like there was in Ukraine. Pat Buchanan shifted over to China's huge naval exercises off its coast on the South China Sea. Another thing that Western media doesn't tell audiences about the status of Taiwan. Part of normalizing U.S.-Chinese relations under Nixon in 1972 was the recognition, legal recognition, public and official recognition that Taiwan is part of China. Okay, but continued arms sales. What is the point? What is going? It is very, very clear that the Chinese take this very seriously because they deem it as theirs. Okay, and the United States recognizes that.
Okay, but I think that's very important because, and that's the same goes with Taiwan and Hong Kong, which is that the Chinese are quite tolerant. And they have been very tolerant in Taiwan. I mean, they basically have accepted this this arrangement, but there's a certain red line for them, which is any move by Taiwan toward independence and any move on the part of the United States toward recognition of independence of Taiwan will be met with force. I mean, they're absolutely clear about this, and it is absolutely, as you say, it is pointless pouring in arms because there is no hope whatsoever that Taiwan would be able to withstand the force of China. So, it's rather like, well, let's send lethal weapons to Ukraine, and do what? Have Ukraine fight with Russia? I mean, it's nuts. But this is the sort of the mentality of the Washington policy establishment.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is in this case is that U.S. motives are made unclear, maybe and probably intentionally. But China's intentions are very, very clear. Don't touch Taiwan. Okay, you get it? You heard me? Okay, yeah. And you agreed to this on the back of establishing diplomatic relations in 1972. Again, you're not going to hear that on NPR. You're not going to hear that on CNN or MSNBC or even Fox, for that matter. Okay, and I think in toto, what Pat Buchanan was really trying to explain is that there's a whole lot going on in the world. There's provocations being made, and with those provocations there are reactions, and they're very real reactions. These aren't trivial. And it seems to me that it's quite pointless. I mean, let's go back at the beginning of this pandemic. It was tabled in the United Nations Security Council, kind of like having, a freeze on conflict. I mean, let's all work together and fight this pandemic. No, the U.S. didn't go along with it. Okay, so here we have an election year, and it's all about Joe Biden's personality and Trump's Twitter account, when the world is abuzz with potential.
The important thing here is that, as far as the policymaking elite is concerned, they want more American involvement, not less. In fact, they can continually berate Trump for not being more actively engaged. Well, active engagement means antagonizing regional and not so regional, as in case of Russia, powers. So, to the extent that there is a foreign policy debate, the debate is, well, why aren't we doing more? Why aren't we involved in Libya? Why aren't we involved more deeply in Syria? Why aren't we doing more with China? This is, the policy of, well, full spectrum dominance, and one that is a very dangerous, could lead to an escalation of conflict.
I forgot to bring up Iran. You said about engaging. I mean, well, Trump pulled out of the nuclear deal with Iran, and okay, so you're not part of it anymore. You said no, I don't want. You picked up your marbles and you left the playground, and now Pompeo comes out, makes a complete ass out of himself, saying they want these snapback provisions. Well, even America's European allies said, but you quit the treaty. You can't do that. Okay, and the U.S. was humiliated at the Security Council when only the Dominican Republic voted with the U.S. America's
European allies. The U.S. was actually, in other words, this was a diplomatic victory for Iran. I mean, so the last thing you want in the world, I mean, you're berating this #1 terrorist state in the world. We hear this constantly in Washington. Well, this #1 terrorist state has just humiliated you in the United Nations Security Council. That's not a good look for a great power. If all of your friends and allies are actually taking the side of the #1 terrorist state in the world.
And the interesting thing is that it wasn't too many years ago, George, that diplomats would sound out what other countries are feeling, how they would vote, and Pompeo just bombastically shows up and demands a vote, and everybody is saying, huh? And this is not how diplomacy works. We're not going to be intimidated. You left the agreement. Everybody else is in it. We'll take care of it from here. Okay.
The interesting thing is that the Europeans, usually they take the American side. I mean, they are very, very complacent about America. This is the one case when they simply were not going to take it. And it was very foolish, because even on the business of the sanctions, the reimposition of sanctions by the United States, the Europeans criticized, but they didn't do very much about it. It's not like they tried to get around the sanctions, and that's why the Iranians have been complaining about the supine Europeans. But on this, they absolutely rejected wholesale the U.S. position.
Okay, I think we've covered everything in the article. I will, in this video, in the description, I will put the link to Pat Buchanan's article. It's very, very thought-provoking and very important in a time where these issues just aren't given the airtime that they need, and it's very important here. Thank you, George. Thank you for watching The Gaggle, and always remember, like, share, and subscribe, and a whole lot more is coming up.